What happens if powerful Western nations keep pretending Ibrahim Traore isn't really the president of Burkina Faso? Well, not much. Because even though the West keeps frowning and folding its arms, something big just happened. 10 other countries have come forward and said loud and clear, yes, Traore is the real leader. And that changes everything. It shows that the West might not be calling the shots like it used to. Its opinion isn't echoing across the globe the way it once did. In fact, it's getting ignored. So the question now is, why is the West so against this young African leader? What's really behind all the side eyes and silence? And most importantly, when will this cold shoulder finally thaw? Let's dig into it. Before we proceed, let me ask you this question. If Captain Ibrahim Traore were to run to be president of the entire continent of Africa, would you vote for him? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. Something major just happened in Burkina Faso, and it didn't involve protests, bullets, or breaking news alerts. It happened quietly, inside a golden room in Ouagadougou, where a line of foreign suits stood shoulder to shoulder, smiling and shaking hands. 10 different countries, all from different corners of the world, showed up to do one thing: make it official. They looked Ibrahim Traore in the eye and said, "We recognise you as the leader of Burkina Faso." This wasn't some routine photo op. It was bold, it was deliberate. And it sent a clear message, one that echoed far beyond the palace walls. The West might still be pretending Traore doesn't count, but clearly others are no longer waiting for Western approval. For Traore, a former soldier who rose from the ranks to lead a nation, this wasn't just about titles or applause. This was about standing tall in a world that's spent decades trying to keep countries like his in the shadows. It was about trust, about countries looking past old alliances and colonial fingerprints and saying, "We believe in you." Why some global powers still refuse to say his name, why they continue to ignore the will of the people, those questions remain on the table. But on this day, when ambassadors from Africa, Asia, and Latin America clapped and stood beside him, Traore didn't have to say much. The room already spoke for him. And for Burkina Faso, a country that's been through one storm after another, it was a moment of pride. They've seen military takeovers, they've weathered political chaos, they've struggled with poverty and watched outside powers play puppet master. But somehow they're still here, still standing. And now, for the first time in a long time, people are starting to believe that this chapter, under this young captain, might just be different. Want me to continue? Ever since Captain Ibrahim Traore stepped in to lead Burkina Faso, the country's been walking a very different path, one that's turning heads all over the world. Instead of waiting for approval from the usual global powerhouses, Burkina Faso is setting its own pace, making its own choices, and, most importantly, picking its own friends. But not everyone's happy about that. In fact, some Western governments are acting like Traore doesn't even exist. They've refused to recognise him as president, pointing to things like human rights concerns and unclear elections. You'll hear them say things like, "It wasn't democratic enough," or "What about the constitution?" They're worried, they say, about voter rights, about transparency, about how leaders come to power. But here's the thing. While those debates carry on, other countries are choosing a different lens. Instead of fixating on how Traore got there, they're watching what he's doing now. And that's what made the ceremony at the palace so interesting. It wasn't loud or flashy, but it carried weight. Flags waved, cameras clicked, and one by one ambassadors walked up and handed over official papers to Traore. Not just from neighbouring African countries, but from Germany, Russia, Rwanda, Algeria, all showing they're ready to work with him. It was formal, respectful, and powerful in its own quiet way. A room full of handshakes, firm nods, and carefully chosen words. The vibe, a mix of pride and diplomacy. Like a country saying, "We're ready to lead again." So then, why is the West still stuck on pause? Well, part of it goes back to how Traore got into power in the first place. There wasn't an election. He didn't win votes. Instead, he took over during a military shake-up that pushed out not one, but two leaders in less than a year. First it was President Traore, then it was Damiba, both gone. Traore stepped in. To Western governments, that's a red flag. They've built their rule books around elections and constitutions, boxes that need to be ticked before a leader can be called legitimate. So when someone like Traore shows up, wearing military fatigues and talking about a new kind of leadership, it doesn't sit well with them. But here's where things get complicated. Since taking office, Traore's been making bold moves. He's pushed back hard on foreign interference. He's taken steps to kick out Western media groups. His administration has tightened its grip on public messaging. Critics call it propaganda. Supporters call it self-defense. Either way, it's ruffling feathers. Western leaders say this kind of behaviour goes against democracy. To them, cutting off outside voices and controlling the news is a step backward. But for Traore, it's all part of taking back control. Things have gotten tense between Burkina Faso and the West lately. And it's not just about politics, it's about who gets to call the shots. Since Captain Ibrahim Traore came into power, he's been making big, bold changes. And not everyone's happy about it. For starters, he's been clamping down on critics. Journalists, activists, and foreign media outlets have faced restrictions. To some back home, that's seen as protecting national interests. But to Western governments, that looks like silencing free speech. And that's just one reason why the relationship's gotten icy. Another, Traore isn't playing by the old rules. Instead of cozying up to Western powers like France, the country's long-time former coloniser, he's doing something unexpected. He's looking east. He's kicked out French military forces. He's reopened the Russian embassy. And he's even stood beside Russian leaders at international events like the Russia-Africa Summit. That's not just a handshake, that's a signal. It tells the world Burkina Faso is charting its own course, even if that means upsetting some powerful friends in the process. To Western governments, this shift is more than just a new friendship. It's a warning sign. Because in their eyes, losing influence in West Africa means losing access, control, and leverage in a region that's rich in resources. And Traore, he isn't backing down. He's talking about building nuclear energy plants. He's promising food independence. He's even floated the idea of manufacturing electric cars in Burkina Faso. Big goals, big dreams. And while these ideas have sparked pride and hope among many Burkinabe citizens, foreign analysts are raising their eyebrows. They say the plans are too ambitious. They call it populist talk. They wonder if it's all just words. But that's not the part that worries them most. What really shakes the table is Traore's constant reminder that Africa doesn't need to ask permission anymore. He's urging African nations to stop giving away their wealth, to stop begging for aid, and to finally start keeping what belongs to them. To some in the West, that kind of talk feels like a threat. Not because it's wrong, but because it means they're no longer in control of the story. And yet, even with all this friction, 10 countries have come forward to say, "We see you, President Traore." Why would they do that? Because Burkina Faso still matters. It sits on land filled with gold, manganese, and other precious minerals. It has a long, though often interrupted, history of working toward democratic progress. And it's starting to gain respect as a serious voice in regional politics. Burkina Faso might be facing tough times right now, but its story isn't just about conflict. It's also about progress, promise, and quiet strength. Not too long ago, the country pulled off something remarkable. In 2015, it held its very first open and fair presidential election, followed by local elections in 2016. For a place that had seen its share of military rule and political shake-ups, that was a big step, a hopeful one. And guess what? That spark of democracy still matters. Even now, countries looking to support good governance in Africa haven't forgotten what Burkina Faso managed to pull off. But it's not just about politics. This country is sitting on treasure. Gold is the big one. It drives the economy, feeds families, and keeps businesses running. But that's just the beginning. There's manganese in the ground, zinc, phosphate, even silver and diamonds. All of it waiting to be turned into schools, roads, hospitals, and jobs. With resources like that, investors pay attention. Global powers take notice. And yes, deals start to flow. Still, there's more to Burkina Faso than what lies underground. Back in the day, when Blaise Compaoré was in charge, Burkina Faso played a huge role as a peacekeeper. When neighbouring countries like Togo or Niger were facing political meltdowns, it was Burkina Faso that stepped in to help calm things down. Its spot on the map doesn't hurt either. It's right in the middle of the Sahel, a region that stretches across West Africa, where countries like Mali, Niger and Chad are dealing with all kinds of trouble: wars, hunger, terrorist threats. So having a country like Burkina Faso play peacemaker, that's valuable, especially for nations looking to keep the region stable, militarily, economically, and diplomatically. Lately, Burkina Faso has been building stronger bridges with its neighbours too. It's made big strides with Ghana, teaming up on trade, security, and more. And when a border argument popped up with Mali, they didn't go to war, they talked it out and reached a peaceful solution. That matters. Because in a region full of tension, a country that chooses calm over chaos stands out. And for leaders who care about teamwork across borders, about growing economies and keeping the peace, Burkina Faso is starting to look like a country worth partnering with. Burkina Faso isn't just sitting on gold and minerals, it's also showing up and speaking up on the global stage. From the International Criminal Court to the Liptako Gourma Authority, the country is part of key international groups that bring leaders together to talk, solve problems, and make decisions that affect millions. Being at those tables gives Burkina Faso more than just a seat, it gives it a voice. By staying involved in these organisations, Burkina Faso shows it wants to play by international rules, work with others, and take responsibility as a global partner. It also opens doors to funding, trade, and outside support that can help the country grow. But let's be real. Despite all the minerals underground and all the meetings overseas, Burkina Faso still has big challenges. A lot of people are poor. Many don't have enough food. Roads and schools are still lacking in many areas. Because of that, international organisations and countries from around the world have stepped in to help, offering food, medicine, money, and technical advice. These efforts don't just help people in the short term, they build stability, giving the country a chance to rise up and stand on its own 2 feet. And yet, despite all of this global engagement, one big question still hangs in the air. Why are Western governments still acting cold toward Ibrahim Traore? What's the hold-up? Turns out the answer runs deeper than Burkina Faso's borders. It's not just about what's happening inside the country, it's about old habits, power plays, and who gets to call the shots. For a long time, the way Western countries dealt with Africa followed a clear pattern. Partner up, but on their own terms. And in countries loaded with natural resources like Burkina Faso, those partnerships often meant taking a lot and giving a little. Trade deals and mining contracts were written in ways that made Western companies richer, while local communities stayed poor. And development aid, it didn't always come with no strings attached. There were rules about who to work with, what policies to follow, and how the money should be used. Rules that often fit Western goals more than African ones. But now there's a new voice shaking things up. Ibrahim Traore isn't following the old playbook. He's calling for a different kind of deal, one where Burkina Faso gets its fair share, keeps control of its resources, and makes decisions based on what works for its own people. Captain Ibrahim Traore is flipping the script, and it's making a lot of powerful people uncomfortable. Instead of begging for handouts or signing deals that leave Burkina Faso with crumbs, he's demanding something different: fairness. If foreign companies want a piece of the country's gold, land, or minerals, they'll have to leave more than just scraps behind. Traore wants real investments: schools, jobs, infrastructure, things that actually help Burkinabe people, not just foreign balance sheets. At the heart of his vision is one big idea: Burkina Faso should stand on its own feet. That means building up local factories, growing food in local fields, and making sure the money made from the country's resources stays in the country, not wired off to Europe or elsewhere. But it doesn't stop there. He's also talking loud, and not everyone likes what he's saying. Traore is calling out former colonial powers, saying it's time for African countries to stop being used and start taking charge. He's urging other leaders across the continent to break free from old systems that were built to keep Africa down and keep others rich. He's not asking, he's insisting. And that's got Western governments squirming. Why? Because for decades, many of those governments, and the corporations that come with them, have been at the top of the food chain. They've had first dibs on Africa's wealth. They've written the contracts, they've shaped the rules. And now Traore is rewriting the game. He's demanding a new kind of relationship, one based on equality, not control. One where African countries make their own choices, not just follow instructions from faraway capitals. That boldness, it's winning him friends in places like Latin America, Asia, and especially Russia. And that shift is rattling cages in the West, where leaders are starting to realise they might be losing their grip. Suddenly the usual playbook, offering loans with strings attached, using aid as leverage, sending in advisors to quietly steer policy, isn't working the way it used to. And Traore isn't playing along. He's pushing for economic freedom. He's backing homegrown businesses. He's telling the world, we don't want to be anyone's project. We want to be partners. In return, Western governments have mostly pulled back. No official recognition, no warm welcomes, just pressure through money, media, and politics. News outlets paint him as a dictator. Critics say he's just another soldier in uniform. They focus on how he came to power, not why so many in his country and others are listening to what he's saying. But that silence from the West, it speaks volumes. What we're seeing right now is more than just political drama. It's a battle over whose rules get to shape the future. Captain Ibrahim Traore isn't following the usual script, and because of that, some powerful nations are trying to paint his way of doing things as wrong, dangerous, or illegitimate. But here's the twist. Their opinion is starting to matter less and less. While the West keeps second-guessing him, a growing number of countries are stepping up and saying, we're in. And these aren't just random allies. They're major players like China, Russia, and a wave of nations from Africa, Asia, and Latin America. They're not just clapping from the sidelines, they're bringing offers to the table, investments, equipment, jobs, and long-term partnerships. And the best part, no lectures, no hidden fine print, no deals that come with demands to change how the country runs itself. These new partners are saying, let's build something that works for both of us. They're offering help in building roads, powering up factories, and getting Burkina Faso's natural resources to actually benefit its own people. And while some in the West keep complaining about how Traore governs, they're not exactly rolling up their sleeves to fix the real problems. Like this, kids and young men digging deep, dangerous holes with bare hands just to find a speck of gold. No gloves, no machines, just hope. That's not just a labour issue, it's a crisis. So ask yourself, what's more harmful? A president who refuses to follow someone else's playbook? Or a system that lets teenagers risk their lives just to survive? Traore's biggest gamble isn't just changing who Burkina Faso works with, it's changing what they work for. He's betting on partnerships that focus on people, not just profits, on projects that lift communities instead of draining them. And for thousands of young people across the country, that could mean the difference between being stuck in poverty and finally having a chance to thrive. These new deals that Burkina Faso is making, they go way beyond money. They're about breaking free from being told what to do, from one-sided stories pushed by outsiders, and from economic setups that always seem to help someone else, more than the people actually living there. By teaming up with countries that don't try to control every move, Burkina Faso is inching closer to the kind of future Captain Ibrahim Traore keeps talking about. A future where the country stands tall on its own, makes its own choices, and finally gets treated with the respect it deserves. So now we have to ask, does the growing support Traore is getting from places like Russia, China, and other African and Latin American countries mean that Western influence in Africa is fading? Is this proof that the old tactics, pressure, conditions, and media spin just don't work anymore in a region that's done playing along? Or is the West going to come back harder, using headlines, economic roadblocks, and online stories to try to stop what's happening? One thing's for sure: Africa isn't sitting quietly anymore. Everyone's paying attention.